Hi, everyone, and welcome to StudioJake. I, of course, am your host, Jacob Airy. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. And if you're watching on YouTube, ring that little bell so you get notifications when I post a new vidcast, because this is where I talk about all things pop culture. And today I have a very special guest. She is an author. She posts her games right on social media, and she is a writer for the Rippaverse. She is about to launch her debut story, Dirty Deeds, on Rippazine #3. Story that I am very excited to read. So please welcome to StudioJake, Carrow Brown. Carrow, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it. And thank you for that wonderful intro, by the way. That was really nice. I felt special.
Oh, good. I'm glad. I like to make my guests feel special for sure. And you, before writing Dirty Deeds, you are actually a novelist. You have written several books. You've written book series, in fact. And I have a few of them here. You have the Ghostwalker Chronicles, Blood in the Rain series, Quarantine with My Avatar, and you also write under a pseudonym. And I would like to tell me, how did you get involved with writing? When did you decide to become a novelist?
It was a long time ago. So the old origin story this could take a minute. So
That's
I
all
actually
right.
I didn't learn how to read until I was 10 due to like some crazy family stuff that was coming on. And my family was so big on trying to help me like figure out to read that when I learned to read and realized that they were happy with it and left me alone, I just kind of kept doing it. Right. It was quite nice. And then I got into fanfic writing like when I was a teenager because that was what we did. So I wrote a whole bunch of like different kinds of fanfic for my favorite anime. And then unfortunately I joined the military and that kind of like squashed a lot of like the creative process at that point. But when I got out, I wanted to pick up the habit of writing again. And in some places, I went right back to the fanfic route because it's just easier to do. But when I decided to actually pursue it professionally was when I was a teacher. So I used to teach special education for a little while. I've worked mostly with children that were diagnosed with autism. And the whole thing came around because in like this orientation that we had, they basically said, if you're going to write a novel, do it under a pseudonym and don't tell anybody that you write it, right? Because kids and parents will like come and find you and be kind of like, what's this thing that you wrote, right? And so that was when I was like, hey, maybe I could actually write a book and make passive income. Now I have learned a lot since then that writing books and promoting them, it's not passive income. It's not.
No.
But the very first book that I wrote was Queens of Swords and Silence. That was my urban fantasy book. And that was such a labor of love in lots of different ways. It actually took me, I wrote the whole thing probably in about 9 months, but I spent 2 years editing it by going to a writing group and basically reading works and editing it and getting feedback and stuff like that. So it was a really good way to sharpen or rather dull my teeth on that process. And then excuse me, real quick. It's dry out here in Texas and it hits the back of my throat in a certain way. And so then what happened after that is, the teaching thing didn't work out. We had a strike in my state and it didn't go very well. And I was kind of like, maybe this isn't the place for me. So I went back to college. And one of the part-time jobs I had was actually as a ghostwriter for a game company. And so what they wanted me to do there was they wanted me to write origin stories for their characters of anywhere between 4 and 10 pages, which if you're talking about an origin story for a character and told that you have a 10-page or less limit, like that's some serious like writing that you have to do. And I had a great mentor who really kind of like showed me like how to do it and not get lost in the weeds and stuff like that. So that was really good. And roughly around that time, I was working for Eric July, who, is CEO and founder of the Rippaverse. And I'll never forget because he messaged me one day and he was like, can you take Monday off from your job? I'm thinking about launching my Comic-Con that day. And I was like, yeah, sure. I don't have a problem with that. And so I took the day off and like halfway through the day, my boss who actually knew who Eric was, he was like, hey, how's it going? And so I sent him the website with like the number going up and up and up. And he was really cool and said, I'll see you next week. And I was like, thank you. I really appreciate that. So, and then a little bit later, Eric was just like, I need you full time. And so I put in my resignation. And I've pretty much been working here since then. The opportunity to write creatively for Rippaverse has been like a new development. Like we kind of talked about it last August. We talked about it last August. And so Eric said, show me what you got. And so I came to the table fully ready with like the script and like the first like 4 pages, and he liked it and gave me the green light to finish the current arc that is kind of sitting there in the backstage right now. So.
Oh wow, that's incredible. Because I always like hearing stories about how things just happen in happenstance. Because I remember I'll admit I'm a little bit in between an optimist and a pessimist, so I'm very neutral usually. And I remember when Eric July first launched ISOM, I was excited because I had followed Eric July for a long time since he was on the Chad Prather show, even before he was with Sarah Gonzalez. And whenever he was like, I'm going to just do it myself. Everyone says, do it yourself. I'm going to do it yourself. I'm like, finally, a guy who is done it. Because I have written novels before as well, and I've got 4 published. And so I was like, yes, someone in the comic book space doing it. That's awesome. Because as you can see, I'm a big comic book reader. I've got Venom on one side and Star Wars on the other.
Fine taste.
Yeah, thank you. And so I was very excited, and I couldn't believe that it hit over 1 million. I think it eventually got to 4 million, right? At some point.
Not that I was counting, but it was 3.7 million. Yeah.
3.7 million. And I remember thinking, this is incredible. It just goes to show that, us comic book collectors and readers, we are looking for stuff. It's not just that we want to bash what's current thing at Marvel and DC. We want all good alternatives. Now, I wanted to go back to your original novels for a while. I'm curious, do you have any influences there? Like as far as like for instance, I really consider Sir Arthur Conan Doyle one of my influences. I'm not as good a writer as he is. I don't claim to be, but just he's really influential in how I write, and as well as Akira Toriyama. For those of you who don't know, it's creator of Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z. So I'm curious, do you have any people who you would cite as influences to your own fiction?
I'd probably say Jim Butcher, who wrote the Dresden Files. His very first book, that's called Stormfront. Like that's actually the book that anytime I'm kind of like, I just don't feel motivated to write, or I just feel like, whatever, like that's what I read. And that first book, it's very tight, and you could tell like it was the one book, like if it doesn't take off, it doesn't take off. He's like on 22 books now in this series, so I think it worked out just fine. But it was there's something about the voice of Harry Dresden that really like resonates with me. So when I wrote Queen of Swords and Silence, I was kind of caveating to that just a little bit, but obviously not wanting to lose who my main character was. That's definitely where I go when I'm struggling. I need like a reminder of what it is, or what it is that I'm striving to do. And then probably after that, like my other guilty pleasure read is it's called Radiance by Grace Davin. It's a romance novel, but the reason I really like it is because Grace Davin has like this really like, I say romance novel and everybody thinks like, men who lost their shirts and the women that helped them find it, right? Stuff like that. But like Grace Davin has like such an intellectual way of like talking about romance and how these two characters came together, that it's mentally stimulating along with the heart thumping stuff. And she like, that's probably one of my favorite books that she's ever done. So those are my two that I would always go to if I'm like, man, I just need to remember what it is that I'm doing and why I'm doing it. So
that makes a lot of sense. I've not read all of the Harry Dresden, but I have read Stormfront. I thought it was very creative. Someone actually gave it to me for a birthday present, a coworker, because they knew I liked fantasy. And I don't even think they knew what it was. I think they just went, and it was probably discounted at the bookstores. Like, Jacob likes magic stuff. And I actually ended up really liking it, though. I think I read the one right after Stormfront, but I haven't done.
Oh, that was, I will tell you, as an avid Harry Dresden fan, the second book is definitely something to chew through. And so we're kind of like, just get through that and it's fine, right? Like, and the only reason we say that is because there are like some plot stuff that's in there that does tie into like the rest of the universe. Right. So that's really good. And also, like, not that like I'm friends with Jim or anything like that, but he's got most of this stuff free on his website. So if you're kind of like, I want to check it out, he's got it there for you to read it. So.
Oh, that's cool. I always like when authors do stuff like that. And since you opened this can of worms, what'd you think of the TV show? Because I actually didn't like it.
So the TV show was actually my introduction to it.
Really?
So, yeah. So because way back when like my husband and I had like more modest gaming stations, when we only had one monitor and not two, right? We had our respected computers. We had a TV in the middle that would just play Sci-Fi all the time. And so the Harry Dresden came up and I was kind of like, what is this? Right. And so I was like, oh, it's based off of a book. I like books. I'll read it. Right. And then I was reading through it and I was like, wow, they're drastically different.
They really are.
Yeah.
His friend that's trapped in the skull, I thought was
Bob?
very different. Yeah, Bob, he's different, totally different TV from novel, at least from Stormfront. But I'm curious too, whenever whenever because you mentioned you pitched this idea, you had the script ready, you had the first 4 pages done. I'm What made you go, I'm going to do a sci-fi for the Rippaverse? Because cosmic stuff is actually kind of new for the Rippaverse. We've got Zaylan coming out, written by Chuck Dixon, who's one of my all-time favorite writers, and so I'm very excited about that. And so, what made you go, I'm going to pivot to sci-fi? Because, like you said, you're very versatile. You've written in several genres, but why did you say, hey, I'm going to do sci-fi for the Rippaverse?
Well, I mean, sci-fi is like where my heart's been at for like the longest time. I grew up like watching TNG with my dad, original Star Trek. I did Star Wars. Dad and I got into like this big fight about Jedi versus Sith at one point. Like it was a total nerd house, right? And even like when Batman Beyond came out, like my dad and I were are like major nerds, and what we would used to do is we'd have the TV on, we'd have like our pillows in front of us while we sat on the floor, right? And we would just like avidly watch this stuff. It was really, really big and influential for me. And, I guess you could say like, Batman Beyond's more cyberpunk because of when it takes place and stuff like that. And yeah, you're right, but still same difference. Okay. But I've always really loved like the creativity that goes into sci-fi. There's something about it that the flavor is different than just like high fantasy, right? So instead of like magic somehow magically doing stuff, you've got science, and most of the science, not all of it, but most of the science is kind of actually rooted in actual science, and I'm always really intrigued by that, right? Mm-hmm. So like for example, Upgrade by Blake Crouch, right? I always have to warn people that if you read Blake Crouch, you kind of need to understand like high school science, because like he'll kind of give you like that quick like introduction course, and then it's gone after that. So, and it really shows in that one in particular. But I guess I'm trying to say like I try to lean towards like intellectual reads. That's not to say that all sci-fi is intellectual reads. I have read some where I'm just like, what is happening? Like this is not what's going on. And it's always really intriguing. Actually, when I took science in college, our homework assignment was that we would be assigned some kind of sci-fi movie, and we'd have to like debunk or say where the science was true in it. That's probably been like my most favorite class ever, because I would like write like papers on like this stuff like all the time, right down to like where gravity wasn't actually correct when they were going around like Jupiter and shit like that.
That's so fun. Yeah, I remember when Deathmatch was still a thing. They did a Batman, or sorry, not Batman. That was Batman versus Darth Vader. They did Goku versus Superman. They did 3 of them, I think. But I remember the first one. You could tell they don't like Dragon Ball Z, but I remember the first one. They used Goku's gravity training on how to manage his power level, and I was just like, "What? No. That's not how that works."
No, that's not how it works at all. No.
And then also, another nerd out is they were also using different versions of Superman to kind of give Superman the edge.
See, that's cheating.
Exactly. So I don't, I always get flamed when I'm like, it depends on which version of Superman Goku is fighting before I make a determination. But it's so funny because even me just having a very normie take on just science. Like I love science fiction, but I am by no means Sir Isaac Newton. But even I was like, no, that's not even how gravity works. Whenever I was watching this death battle, but and that's so cool too, that how real science informs science fiction. And it's kind of interesting because I remember reading that a lot of when they were building the International Space Station and whatnot, they actually used some science fiction theories to help craft it. And I always think that's really fascinating. And you mentioned that you like Batman Beyond. I was watching Batman Beyond every Saturday morning on Kids WB. I think now it's called something else, but I was watching it back then. And right, it was, I remember at first I was kind of angry when it was Terry McGinnis because I wanted Tim Drake to be Batman in this sequel. And of course, we all found out what happened to Tim Drake in Batman Beyond Return of the Joker. But I remember the show won me over after just like 2 episodes. I was okay, I'll suspend my Batman the Animated Series puritanism for this because I'm really enjoying it. But what are some other? Because I heard you mention you were into anime.
What
are some of your favorite anime series?
Like Ghost in the Shell, Psycho Pass, Fruits Basket because I like to cry.
Fruits Basket is actually my wife's favorite anime.
Yeah, it's a good one. I was part of like when it originally came out, and like one of the characters came out, and I was like, oh, so this isn't going past this episode, right? And somebody was like, why? It's like, because that is a she, not a he, right? You know, it was one of those things. Um, so I'm trying to think because I watch a lot of them. I actually started watching like the new Dragon Ball Super, which I know a lot of Dragon Ball fans like you're just now watching it. It's like, yeah, I am because like it's a lot. I might as well just start watching One Piece at this point.
Right.
Um, so I'm trying to think what else because those are my two big ones that I really like.
Ghost in the Shell is one of my favorites. I like the original '90s cut. Although
Mhm.
I do like the remastered edition, but I actually caused some controversy because I actually like the one with Scarlett Johansson. I thought that the director did a good job of making it like the anime, but that's actually what American critics hated about it was too much like the anime. I thought that was kind of funny,
I think
but
my only nitpick on that is Major Kusanagi, because Major Kusanagi in the universe of Ghost in the Shell, not to be like a total weeb right now, guys, but she
oh,
is literally
please.
one of the world best hackers. Like she is the best hacker in the world. So the fact that in the movie they're like, okay, yeah, I'm gonna brain dive into like this cyborg without like a firewall. I was like, first off, no. She wouldn't do that. She would have firewalls and she would have brain mazes and she would be like completely set up to do this. No, just dives in. It's like, oh, okay, I guess we're gonna do that. But that's like, and then I think they changed her origin story. But I will say like Kusanagi is probably like the victim of rewriting in hindsight the most. Because I mean, she originally started off as just a super hacker. It's like you're a super hacker with a gun. Good job, right? And then in the 1990s version that came out, she was obviously the leader of like the super elite team because the manga version of it got really popular. And then after that, when they kept redoing it, it's like, okay, we'll just make her younger. And now she wasn't in a plane crash. Now it happened in the womb and all this other stuff. Like the one adaptation where it happened in the womb, I was like, stop. Like no. Like the thing where she was like crippled after the plane crash was honestly perfect. You did not need to go younger. It does not do anything. At this point, she's not even technically human. She's just been the cyborg that you just put like a little tiny fetus in. So
What's funny is when I first watched The Laughing Man, I didn't know that it was part of a TV show, or that it was a compilation. So
mhm.
it was for a while. Hulu actually had all the Ghost in the Shell movies, and so I was able to watch. They had the remastered version of it, though. I found the '90s one later on DVD.
Mhm.
But I remember watching The Laughing Man, and I was like, this feels because characters came out of nowhere and then they just died. Like there was an android that just appeared, and I was like, who is this guy? And then I finally Googled it, and I was like, oh, it's a compilation movie. That's why I'm lost. But it was still good. I actually enjoyed that one. It was the show had a really long, obnoxious title. I remember it was something really long. But anyway, yeah, I could talk about Ghost in the Shell all day. I loved the first two films and The Laughing Man, and there was another compilation film from the TV show that I'm trying to remember what it was called. But the another one you mentioned, Psychopaths. That's actually one other anime fans have told me I should watch, but I haven't just sat down and done it yet.
Mhm.
Uh,
It's a good
are you going to
dystopia.
encourage me or discourage me?
It's actually a really good dystopia. Like it's a psychological thriller that does take place in the future, and it's basically like what would happen with society if you know how like in India they have a class system that if you're born into it, that's kind of where you stay. It's something similar to that, but that what they do is they actually place you by how well like your mental well-being,
Oh,
right?
interesting.
Yeah, so that's why it's called a psychopath. Like my psychopath is at this level, right? And so like if you're a person that's like, stress sensitive and stuff like that, they're gonna be like, okay, your psychopath is actually gonna be a little bit lower, and we're going to actually not put you in anything like super stressful, like no cop jobs, nothing like that, right?
Mm.
And of course, like the thing with that is like if you experience trauma or anything like that, that's gonna affect your psychopath. And this is kind of like a world where at this point in the setting, like they've kind of like really like nailed down crime. And it's not like this isn't like a really big spoiler, but like they nailed down crime to like the point where somebody is literally like, stabbing another person to like death in the street. And they're like, what's that? Like, I don't know what's happening. Okay. And
Mm.
they just keep walking because they don't understand it. Right.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so there's stuff like that in there. So psychological thrillers and dystopias are really interesting to me, mostly because, like, you know, my degree's in psychology, so I'm kind of like, show me more, right? And dystopias and sci-fi are really good about talking about like the human psyche and like how that's affected. There's another one. There's a novel. It's called The Crypt, and it's basically about like the ship in space, and only criminals get sent there because once you have a tour on the ship, you're not expected to come back, right? And it's watching like all the like these different groups of people who are wanted for various crimes, you know, interacting on the ship. It's really interesting. It's really good.
That does sound cool. It always is interesting what fascinates us at especially being writers, what stories intrigue us the most. And I want to pivot right back to the Rippaverse. And by the way, you don't have to. I'm not asking for particular names, but I'm always curious inside because Rippaverse has a lot of critics. And they say the most insane out there things that I've ever heard about a company. And some you would think would be on board with the Rippaverse, and you're kind of surprised by that. And like I said, I don't want to start drama, so I'm not going to name names. But in home base, what is y'all's reaction to it? Because I know Eric July, before he would kind of be very visceral, but then he decided, you know what, I'm going to take the high road, and I personally respect that about him. You know, he doesn't get involved with squabbles. He does stamp out rumors if some fake gossip is going around. But I'm curious, like the rest of you, like at home base, when y'all hear so and so said such and such about the Rippaverse. Do y'all just kind of laugh it off? Do y'all roll y'all's eyes? How do y'all react to it in-house?
It depends. I mean, like in the beginning, like obviously, like for the first time watchers, like Eric, one of his segments used to be monetize your haters. So if somebody came and had something to say, he would like bring them onto a call and be like, okay, let's like monetize it, right? And we ended up pivoting from that because obviously, you know, some commentators are just looking to make money, and we know. I hate saying this. We notice the comments go up when rent is due. So that's something that's something that we have noticed. And so like in that regard, like if it's not like fair criticism like that, we're kind of like, you know, whatever. But in other cases, sometimes like somebody sent me like a tweet and they're kind of like, somebody said this. And my first thought was like, who is this? Right. And not to be kind of like discrediting and saying like, you're a nobody, I'm not going to listen to you, but it was still kind of like, who are you and why are you talking about us and like what's going on here?
Right.
And sometimes like the comments like aren't even like we have like there was one creator who basically started bad mouthing the company. It wasn't actually legit. What happened was as we got more positive feedback about certain things, it dwindled their light, which I don't know what to do for you on that, but it dwindled their light. And so they took that personal and they just started to like attack us. And I've read like some really outrageous stuff. I think my favorite BS that I've heard so far is that like Eric stays late at the warehouse to spend time with the twins, something along those lines, which is completely ridiculous because first off, Eric barely comes to the website, and two, the twins are in Canada, so I don't understand, you know. But sometimes they just want to say stuff because it's salacious, it gets attention, and obviously they're here to make money, and that's their model. And I wish that wasn't lucrative, but unfortunately algorithms like promote that kind of stuff, so it's like there's only so much we can do.
It's true. That is a sad reality of being on YouTube. Is I even made this comment because I did a video about how I was excited about Dragon Ball Sparking Zero. It didn't even get 100 views. But then I did a video complaining about a celebrity couple, blew everything. I think I got over 10,000 views in the first day, and I was like, "What?" So yeah, unfortunately, like you said, that's real thing. But as far as releases, what is one where you thought I'm sure you like all of them, but what's one where you were thinking, oh, I'm not sure if this will mesh well with the fans, but then you were really excited about the fan reaction to it, as far as Rippaverse releases, where you were like, oh, this one might do well, but it probably won't do this. But then it did. It exceeded your expectations.
So I'll get a little bit of flack for this. So the one where I originally saw the concept when it came in was actually Horseman, right? And I saw that email come in from Chuck with like this sketch, and I was kind of like, what is this? Like, Chuck, what are you doing? Right? Like that was my first thought. And this is well before I was actually brought on to like read scripts and proof pages and stuff like that. Like originally Eric had me more into like a admin role, but then a need came up where it's like my eyes needed to be on the pages too. So now like I see everything. I know everything. Right. So, and what ended up winning me over was actually that poster that Keenan White did of the guy on the pool table with the, the pew pew in his mouth. Right. And I saw that and I saw that and I was like, that's my guy. That's my boyfriend. Okay. Like we're going to get married. Right. And so that was the one again, where I was originally like, oh, I just don't know. But like, it's like, it just blew everything out of the water. And, it has to do with like vigilante characters and morally gray characters are always like particularly popular because there is always like something within us where when we see an injustice, we wish that we could do something about it. But because we are held by like, social constraints and stuff like that in the law, whatever, we opt to not do it. But when we see like another character do this thing that we wish would be done, we're like, yeah, that's my guy. Right.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And Chuck Dixon is the perfect for those street level documentaries, having done G.I. Joe and Batman and The Punisher. So he's the right pick for that kind of character. Yeah. It's kind of funny. I was telling my dad the other day, he wrote Star Wars General Grievous, which is about these rogue Jedi who go after to assassinate General Grievous. And I told my dad, it's so funny because I know Chuck Dixon is the co-creator of Bane. So in that particular comic, when Grievous would have dialogue in my head, I was hearing Bane and not the original General Grievous voice actor. So I thought that was kind of funny when I was reading it. And I even reread it the other day and I was like, I wonder if this is still a thing after I talked to my dad. And yeah, I still, particularly the Tom Hardy one, which so instead of General Kenobi, I was hearing something totally different, but yeah. Exactly. Yeah. But all right. So last question, I want to ask one more question about Dirty Deeds is why the title? Or will that give too much away?
There's a crew member that has a particular collection and that had an influence. So that's what I'll say.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So at the end of the streams, I always ask my guests a curveball question, and it's just meant to be fun. I like to try to stump my guests with this. It comes out of nowhere. So if when the Rippaverse biographical film eventually gets made, who is playing you in that movie?
Oh man, I don't know. This is hard because I don't actually like play. I don't do celebrities really well. I would like it to be a librarian looking character, right? Because I'm not gonna I work out and stuff like that, but like at the end of the day, I'm a total librarian in the sense that I'm usually surrounded by books, right? Sure. I've got books, I've got yarn. I think if I hadn't brushed my hair before I came on, like everything would be like completely wild right now, right? So whoever looks the most librarian would probably play me, or I would probably say somebody that's used to having to stare at like 5 monitors at once as well. So it's like never blinking, right? It's just always like doing this. So
that makes sense. All right, Carrow. So where can people find you?
You can find me on X. I go under the handle of Rippalorian ever since I did like that cosplay. I have a website, it's carrowbrown.com. I've got books on there. I've got comics. I've got like a YouTube channel, but I'll be honest, like it's been pretty dead. But there's some drunk book reviews on there. If you want to watch me get like completely plastered and talk about why I don't like certain books, that's totally a thing. And then after that, I usually hang out with people that knit and complain about knitting related things. So you can find that on Knit Night and another podcast called Politically Incorrect Knitters. So I have to say that carefully.
That makes perfect sense. And Carrow, thank you so much for coming on and speaking with me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I can't wait to hear your thoughts on all the releases that we've got coming out. So
speaking of which, Rippazine 3 is available for pre-order right now at Rippaverse.com. It features Dirty Deeds by Carrow, and I am very excited for it. I've already pre-purchased my copy, so looking forward to it. Everyone else, thank you so much for joining us today on StudioJake, and I'll see you next time.